Okay, let's walk through some samples from chapter 16, and then we'll move on in the next video to creating our own version of these. So I've opened up the chapter 16 apps, and I've already gone through the previous video where I've configured the database, so hopefully that's all working. I'm going to start with this basic view.aspx and basic grid view, the SQL data source one and the one without that. First I'm going to open up this one, and I'm going to look at this, and in design view I will see a grid here, and this is a nice complicated control that will display data in a grid format for us. Expand the number of columns and the number of rows as needed. So when I'm seeing it here, it just says column 0, 1, 2, and then it just this fake data here. But when I run this, it should show real data. So if I were to run this in the browser, I will see the data actually filled in, the column names, and the actual data from the database. So hopefully that's working correctly for you. So let me stop this. And this is actually done the grids here, but there's no SQL Server control here. And so we're actually doing some code here. So although we've used the data grid here to automate some of this stuff, we're still using some code. So if I go and look into the code here, on the page load event is some familiar code which we would have seen last unit. We grabbed the Northwinds connection string from the web config file. We define a select command. We create an SQL connection. We create a command that combines that SQL command with the connection we just created. On the connection string, the connection uses the connection string, so these are all being tied together. We then create a SQL adapter with this command, and then we create a data set we create a data set, and then with our SQL adapter we fill the data set with a table of information out there. And then so this is all stuff we were doing in the previous class, and this is what we're going to get rid of soon, is this sort of stuff, because we'll do it automatically or with a control. So finally we bind the grid view. We say grid view.dataSource is DS and grid view.dataBind. This will show that grid view will only grab and display the database from here. If I switch back here and look at the actual control here, so I can see the different properties of my data grid, and we'll get into these in more detail in a little bit. So let's look at another version of this. So this was the data grid view. Let's look at it with the data source, the SQL data source. So here's just the basic one. There's no data source, no other controls here. Now let's open up this one, switch to design view, and I'll see my same data grid here, but I also see this little SQL data source here, which will configure my data source. And if I go look at my code, there's no code in the page load event. All the binding and stuff is done automatically with this control. So in this control, if I look over in the parameters here, I'll see it's configured. There's a connection string configured here that ties it into my database. In fact, if I switch this, rather than in design view, if I switch to source view, I can see the select command that's being used here and the connection string. And in fact, if this isn't working, right now it's using the Northwinds data connection string, which connects up to the SQL Server version. If I want to switch this to my MDF one, I can actually go in here and switch it to MDF and connect to a different data source. So here's my local MDF file that I'm connecting to. Again, we did this before, and if I just connect up Northwinds, because again I've got in my web config, remember I've got two different connection strings defined for two different copies of the Northwinds database. So again, this view, let me switch back to design view here, uses this SQL data source control, which helps automate a lot of our process, setting up this connection, doing the connection string, specifying the database and that sort of stuff. So we'll look at ways of configuring these in just a sec. Let's go and look at some more of these examples. Okay, let's walk through a couple more of these examples. Let's stick with the grid views initially. Now with grid views you can set a lot of characteristics. I'm opening up the grid view styles. I'm not going to walk you through how to set up styles or whatever, but if you need to, you can set up styles. You can set up styles for the whole grid or for specific columns, so you can format them however you want, change the layout, the names of the column headings, and how this information is displayed. You can control paging and how many are displayed on each page. So all that stuff can be controlled. Grid views are very powerful once you start working with them. You can also add editing features, and we'll look at that. They have an example here of grid view edit. And again, it lists our different products here. Here's our SERP, and I can hit edit, and I can change this value back to what it originally was, for example. And so again, once I hit edit, it changes the row. It changes each of the display field to text boxes. I can edit the fields. It then changes and gives me an update command. So I can add that information, and I hit update, and that'll save that information into the database using update query. So again, I can enable this update. You can also enable delete, so you can delete fields here. And when we get into our practice problems, we'll work more with those. So with grid views, you can do these various things. You can also combine grid views together. Grid view select will actually show two grids. The top grid view called grid categories, and the bottom view called grid products. So now when I run this, initially it'll just populate the top view grid categories. So this is like dairy products and meat and produce and things like that. Now if I select one of these, it'll display the products down here and populate the bottom area. So if I select one of these values, this grid is then populated with more details. So again, you can base one grid on the selected values of the other, and you can see they've done some formatting here using themes. Now a quick overview on how that works. So our first grid is set up with a data source up here, and that's our first grid, and that just starts right away. And our second grid here will have a command that'll only grab information based on the selected field up above. So this grid, again, just a quick reminder of the two grids. The top grid is called grid categories. That's its name, grid categories, and this bottom view is grid products. But it's the grid categories we'll want to remember. Now this grid is tied to this data source here right above it called source products. So I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to go down and find the select query, which will be some SQL that'll be here. It's selecting the product ID, the information for the products. And again, there's a where clause here where category ID equals, and there's a special at category ID. This is a parameter. And then my parameter value is here, category ID, which will be that at category ID. It actually goes into the grid categories, the above grid, and finds a selected data key for that. So it's finding the selected value up here and using that as a parameter for this one. And again, this is all done without any code. If I look at the code itself, there's no C# stuff in the back end, just using these controls. Okay, so those are some grid views. I think we did the edit, we did the styles, and I'm not going to do too much in the templates. Again, you can do a lot of more stuff with these grid views. I'm going to show you two other things, a detail view and a form view. So these are two other controls. If we go to design view now, I have a details view here tied to a data source rather than a grid. And this will display information about a single product. And then I can switch from product to product. here. And I can also enable edit or delete, so I can go in here and change this value. For that. Now it's just updating that value. It should have remembered what that value is. Oh, yeah, it's a tip. I have to actually change. If I hit update, there. Try that again. I hit edit, I change its value, and then I hit update to save that value. Okay, so that's detail view. And again, you can specify what fields are shown in the detail view. And it shows a single product stuff. You can also change the paging and how paging is done with this detail view. And then there's one other form view here. Let's bring that up. So again, similar layout. We have a data source here and a data view here, a form view. And again, that's just showing our information in a simple form, and here we don't have editing or anything enabled, so it's just displaying that data for whatever. So just another way of showing that data that we're selecting. So our next step is to show you how to create a one of these SQL data sources, and for example a data view or a details view, and tie them all together. So that will be in the next video.